The breath of the northern forest was slow and deep beneath a sky of brittle stars. Xeeona Septhyr sat by himself upon a fallen trunk, the flames of his campfire painting amber lines across his worn leather armor. The poison was completely gone from his veins, yet its memory lingered like an old scar, an ache that reminded him every time he takes a breath. The northern forest was quiet that night. No wolves tested the dark, no goblin chatter among the trees, only the steady crackle of fire and the soft whisper of wind moving through snowy pines. He preferred it this way. Still, his short sword rested on his belt, plain and unadorned, its edge catching a dull reflection from the coals as he enjoys his meal through the night. The north did not forgive carelessness. The flames sank lower. Xeeona exhaled slowly and leaned back, yawned, as he allowed his eyes to drift half closed. He just let the fire burn to embers before sleep claimed him. Then it came, a scream, not the distant cry of an animal or the panic of a prey, but a woman's voice, sharp with terror slicing through the quietness of the night. Xeeona was on his feet before the echo faded. He did not run blindly. His steps were swift but measured. He knew every bend of this forest, every hollow where snow gathered too thick, every ridge where wind carried sound farther than it should. A woman alone here at this late night, in this season, was wrong. The north did not welcome such fragility or such carelessness. Another cry tore through the trees. He moved faster. When he broke into the small clearing, his short sword was already in his hand. Two goblins hunched over a woman on the snowy ground, their mottled green skin twitching with cruel excitement. One turned first, sharp eyes locking onto Xeeona's silhouette, framed by moonlight. Recognition flickered. They did not hiss or attack. They did not test their luck. They simply fled. Curses in their own tongues spilled from their lips as they vanished between the trees, scrambling over roots and vanishing into the underbrush. Foolish creatures they were, but not suicidal. Even goblins whispered stories of the half-elf ranger who hunted the forest without mercy. Silence reclaimed. Xeeona lowered his blade slightly and approached the woman. She was young, human. Her dark hair spilled across her shoulders, catching frost at the edges. Her clothing was thin, absurdly thin for the unforgiving cold. Little more than layered cloth meant for temperate lands, or most likely for bedrooms. No fur, no travel gear, not even a weapon. Impossible. Are you hurt? Xeeona asked, his voice low and steady. She shook her head quickly, breath trembling in the cold air. No, I thought I was going to die. Thank you. I don't know how to repay you. Her eyes lingered on him with a mixture of relief and something softer. Xeeona studied her carefully. No blood, no torn flesh, just fear and cold creeping into her skin. He exhaled through his nose. "You would have," he said bluntly, "with those clothes." He reached and gave the fur cloak from his pack. He rarely wore it. His blood ran cool enough without it, but she would not survive the night without protection. He draped it over her shoulders. "This cold will kill you faster than goblins," he added. "My camp is near. There is fire." Her expression softened into gratitude. "I am in your debt. Save it," Xeeona replied. He turned without flourish and led her through the trees. She followed closely, clutching the fur around her slender frame. When they returned to the camp, the fire was still burning softly. Xeeona crouched and fed it fresh wood until flames rose again. The woman settled near the warmth, curling on his sleeping mat beside the blaze with visible relief. The forest watched, and Xeeona listened. The fire settled into a steady burn, its glow pushing back the worst of the cold's cruelty. Xeeona lay on his side away from the woman, one arm beneath his head, eyes half closed but never truly asleep. The forest had resumed its slow breathing and silence. The woman rested near the flames, wrapped in his fur, her silhouette soft against the firelight. Minutes passed, then the weight shifted. A warmth moved closer. Xeona's eyes snapped open as he felt a soft fabric brushing against his arm. The woman was no longer by the fire. She was beside him. "What are you doing?" he asked sharply, already pushing himself up on one elbow. She did not recoil. Instead, she leaned closer. Beneath the fur cloak he had given her, the thin cloth she wore parted slightly, revealing more skin than the cold would ever allow. Her breath was warm against his face. "I wanted to thank you," she said softly, her voice low and melodic, carrying an almost hypnotic sweetness. "You saved my life. It is the least I can offer." Her fingers brushed lightly against his chest. Xeeona stiffened. "Woman," he said, irritation in his tone, "you owe me nothing, especially not this." She tried to draw closer, her voice dropping softer. "Let me repay you." He acted fast, not cruelly, but enough to halt her. "You will repay me by surviving the night," he replied. "Go back to the fire. Sleep before the cold settles deeper." For a heartbeat, something unreadable flickered behind her eyes. Then she withdrew back to the sleeping mat. She returned to the edge of the flames, curling into the fur with visible displeasure. "You are a difficult man, Ranger," she muttered, "stubborn as a dwarf." Xeeona blinked. The words struck something in his mind. Weeks ago in this same forest, 2 dwarves had grunted nearly the same judgment after one of his decisions. "You've the temper of a dwarf," Boric had laughed. "More stone than elf in you." Xeeona exhaled through his nose. A faint, reluctant smile touched the corner of his mouth. He rolled onto his side again. "Sleep," he muttered. The forest listened, and at last true sleep took him. He woke to wrongness, not a sound, not a scent or movement, absence. His hand moved automatically to where his short sword always rested. Empty. His other hand went to his pouch. Gone. He sat upright instantly. The fire had burned low to grey ash. The woman was gone, with his weapon and belongings. Xeeona rose slowly, jaw tightening. Filthy thief, he growled under his breath. Yet even as anger flared, confusion followed close behind. He had slept but lightly. He has always slept lightly. A seasoned ranger did not surrender himself fully to the dark. And the woman, she had not carried herself like a cut purse. No tension in her shoulders or in her face, no quick, measuring glances at his gear, no instinctive scanning of exits. And yet his sword and belt pouch were missing. He crouched and examined the ground. No fresh footprints, no drag marks, no disturbance in the frost. The clearing lay untouched, as if she had simply vanished into the air. Xeona's frown deepened. Impossible. He straightened slowly and turned toward the trees and beyond where he had last seen her. Under the mercy of those goblins, he began walking toward that point, every sense sharpening, every instinct pricked. The forest was still silent, too silent. The morning wind of the northern forest carried a hard, biting chill. Xeeona returned to the clearing where he had first found the woman the night before. The place looked unchanged, quiet, the snowy grass stiff beneath his boots. No struggle, no trail, no sign that anyone had stood before there at all. He crouched low, fingers brushing the ground, searching for something, anything. No footprints, no broken stems, not even the faint disturbances that frightened prey usually left behind. That thought alone was wrong. Xeeona straightened slowly, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the surroundings. Someone was watching him. He heard no sound exactly, nor a movement he could clearly see. It was the faint pressure at the edge of instinct, the same sensation that warned a hunter when something else shared the woods. A goblin. He felt it as surely as the cold in his lungs, but Xeeona did not turn. Instead, he sighed loudly and rubbed the back of his neck as though frustrated with the failed search. Then he began walking away from the clearing at a casual pace, boots crunching deliberately over the frost. If the creature wanted something, he would let it reveal itself. He moved through the trees for several minutes before finding a fallen log beneath a cluster of old pines. With exaggerated carelessness, he settled beside it as though deciding to rest. No weapon, no caution, just looking like a tired ranger who had lost interest. He leaned back and slowly closed his eyes, but he did not sleep. Just a couple of minutes has passed. The forest whispered quietly around him, branches creaking, distant crows calling somewhere deeper in the woods. Then came the sound, soft, cautious, goblin feet over frozen leaves. Xeeona resisted the urge to tighten his muscles. The goblin crept closer, closer still. Through the thin slit of his lashes, Xeeona finally caught a glimpse of the creature, a small, hunched figure closing to him with a surprising care. His green skin was mottled with old scars, his yellow eyes darting nervously in every direction. He was carrying something. The goblin stopped a few steps from him. For a moment he simply stared, and as if deciding whether the sleeping ranger might suddenly leap up and kill him. Then, very slowly, decided to step forward. Something touched the ground beside Xeona's hand. Metal scraped lightly against bark. Another object followed, rolled parchment. The goblin hesitated one last time, then ran away into the forest as silently as he had come. Xeona waited. 10 breaths. 20. Only when the woods had fully swallowed the creature's presence did he open his eyes. Beside him lay a crude, short sword. He picked it up and turned it in the weak morning light. The blade was rough, poorly balanced, the work of goblin hands. But it was sharp enough, and after the disappearance of his own weapon it would serve. His gaze shifted to the parchment. He checked it carefully. Inside was a map, if it could even be called that. The lines were crooked and uneven, clearly drawn by an unsteady hand. A cluster of trees, a winding path, a jagged mark that might represent something, but the meaning was clear enough. It pointed to a location not far from here. Xeona already knows the northern forest better than anyone else. Xeona stared at the crude drawing for a long moment. "Why?" he murmured under his breath. "Goblins did not give gifts. They certainly did not arm their enemies and guide them toward hidden places." He looked back into the forest where the creature had vanished. 2 possibilities formed in his mind. Either this was the most foolishly constructed trap he had ever seen, or the goblin was trying to help him. Xeona rose slowly, sliding the ugly blade into his belt. "Only one way to find out," he muttered. With the crude map folded in his hand, the ranger turned and began walking toward the place the goblin had marked. He kept walking at a calm pace. The crude map led Xeona to the northeastern part of the forest, through a rough road where the trees began to thin and the land rose into a series of cold, wind-bitten hills. The air felt different here, sharper, quieter. Xeona slowed as he approached the place marked on the parchment. He rarely relied on maps. He knew these woods better than most men knew their own homes. Every ridge, every stream, every old hunter's path lived somewhere in his memory. Yet when the hill opened before him, something stood there that should not exist, a stone structure, old, weathered, half sunken into the slope as if it had rested there for centuries. Xeona stopped. "That's impossible," he murmured. He had passed through this region countless times, hunted here, camped nearby. No such building had ever stood here before. He approached cautiously. Up close, the stones seemed strange. Stones were worn and cracked like ancient ruins, but the presence felt wrong, like a mask rather than true age. And beneath that cold walls, he felt it, magic. Not the kind that lingered inside walls or artifacts. No, the feeling within the structure was dead and empty. The magic was the structure itself. This building itself had been created by magic. That realization settled heavily in his mind, which meant one thing: it had not been here long. "That's why I've never seen it," Xeona whispered to himself. The forest around the hill was silent. No voices, no movement. If goblins lived here, they were being very quiet and careful. Xeona drew the crude goblin sword from his belt and stepped inside. The interior was simply empty. 4 rough stone walls, dusty ground. No furniture, no fire, no sign of life. Just a ruin. But Xeeona had spent too many years hunting through caves and abandoned forts to trust first impressions. He scanned the floor carefully. There it was, near the far wall, a seam in the stone. He knelt and brushed dirt aside until a small iron ring appeared beneath his fingers. With a quiet grunt he pulled. The stone hatch lifted with a dull scrape. Cold air breathed up from the darkness below. A narrow staircase spiraled downward into the earth. Xeeona did not hesitate. Curiosity tugged at him, stronger than caution, perhaps stronger than wisdom. He descended quickly. The stairs ended in a rough underground chamber, and the moment his boots touched the floor, he realized his mistake. 6 goblins stared at him. They had been gathered around a small fire pit, gnawing on strips of roasted meat. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Surprise hung thick in the stale underground air. Then Xeeona saw one face he recognized, a scar cut across the goblin's face. His yellow eyes were sharp, calculating. The same goblin who had left him the sword. The creature watched him silently. 5 of the others snarled and leapt to their feet. Weapons flashed. The scarred goblin did not move. Instead, he gave the slightest nod, as if confirming something, and slipped backward into the shadows of a narrow corridor behind the chamber. He vanished without doing anything else. The other 5 charged. Xeeona sighed softly. The crude goblin blade was light in his hand. Poorly balanced, yes, but sharp enough. The first goblin died before it finished its scream. Steel flashed once, twice. The fight ended quickly. Goblins were vicious, but they were not disciplined fighters. Within moments, the chamber fell silent again, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the final, twitching breaths of the fallen creatures. Xeeona stood there with his bloody sword and looked toward the corridor where the scarred goblin had disappeared. A magically conjured ruin, a hidden underground chamber, goblins camping beneath it, and one of them, twice now, had chosen to help him. Xeeona frowned. Something strange is happening here, he muttered. And stranger still than the magic, stranger than the ruin itself, was the idea that a goblin might need the help of a half-elf ranger badly enough to risk everything to guide him to this place. The tunnel looked darker. One moment there was the rough stone chamber behind him, the fire, the bodies of 5 dead goblins cooling in the dark. The next, there was only the corridor ahead, narrow breathing cool air that tasted of wet earth and something magical beneath it. Xeeona did not rush. He had made that mistake once already. The hatch in the floor, the stairs, the easy descent into a room full of goblins. That had been carelessness dressed as curiosity. He would not repeat it. He moved instead the way the forest had taught him to move, slow, deliberate. Each boot placement tested before weight followed. The crude goblin sword sat in his grip, ugly piece of iron, its balance wrong in a way that nagged at the back of his hand. A proper blade settled into the palm like a word spoken in a familiar language. This one felt like a question everyone had simply ignored, but it was sharp enough. It was confirmed that much on the 5 dead goblins behind him. For now, it would do. The cavern bent once, then again, cutting deeper into the hill's belly. The darkness ahead was absolute, relieved only by the faint grey memory of the chamber's fire at his back. And then, not even that. Xeeona slowed his breathing, letting his other senses fill the space that sight abandoned him. Air movement, sound, the pressure of stone on either side. He was thinking about the scarred goblin, not with warmth, with suspicion, which was a more reliable compass. Goblins did not help anyone. Goblins did not arm strangers, map them toward hidden places, and vanish into dark corridors with nothing more than a quiet nod. That was not goblin behavior. That was something else wearing goblin skin, or a creature with another purpose, asking for help while appearing to serve someone else. Either way, Xeeona intended to find out which. He almost stepped on the first trap without noticing it. Almost. His boot hovered over a seam in the stone floor, too deliberate to be natural, too clean to be old. He crouched, running 2 fingers along the stone. A tension mechanism, spring-loaded from the feel of the pressure plate set into the rock. Whatever it had been rigged to release, spikes, perhaps, or a weighted crossbar. Something deadly. The triggering mechanism had been severed at the joint. Recently, the metal where the cord had been cut still held a faint, bright edge. Xeeona straightened slowly. Someone had been here before him, disarming the trap. He moved on. The second trap was mounted to the wall, a crude trigger disguised behind a jutting spur of stone. The kind of thing a man could simply step in the dark and never know until he heard the mechanism snap. It had been disarmed just as cleanly. The mounting pins pulled free, the arms folded back against the rock. The third trap was different. He felt it before he saw it. A pressure in the air, the sensation of something stretched thin across the passage, invisible to the eye but present in the way that old magic always was. If a person knew how to listen for it. He stopped, holding the feeling the way a hunter holds a snapped twig, carefully, without shifting it. A faint word, inscribed. From the residue of it, sigils etched into the stone itself, activated by passage through a specific point. Not goblin work. The craftsmanship was too smart, too deliberate. Goblins built traps from instinct and crude, scavenged parts. This had been placed by something that understood intention, and it had been broken. Not dispelled, broken. The sigils on the nearest wall were scored through with a single deep groove, gouged by something sharp. The magic had collapsed inward, its structure undone, not by counter-sorcery, but by the destruction of the inscription itself. A brute solution. Simple. Effective. Xeeona stared at the ruined sigil for a long moment. A goblin could not dispel a magical ward. That required knowledge the goblins did not possess, understanding of structure, of how the spell breathed, of where its weight rested. But a smart enough goblin could destroy the inscription if it knew precisely where to cut. And that kind of knowledge only came from one source. The creature had seen this ward built, which meant whoever had placed it Whoever had constructed this entire underground space filled it with traps, both steel and sorcerous. The scarred goblin had been close enough to that person to learn the shape of the work, close enough to know how to undo it. Xeeona stored that tart away in his mind and kept moving. The tunnel widened gradually, the oppressive press of the walls easing as the floor leveled and the ceiling rose. The air changed too, less raw stone, a smell that did not belong underground, wax, ash, and beneath it, faint and metallic, the unmistakable scent of blood. He stopped, ahead, where the passage curved toward a faint suggestion of red light. There was a door, wooden, rough-hewn from planks that looked salvaged rather than crafted. It sat crooked in a stone frame slightly ajar, the gap between door and jamb no wider than a finger's breadth. No light spilled through it, but sound did. A voice, low, female, rhythmic in a way that was not quite speech, syllables that rose and fell with deliberate cadence, threading through each other in patterns that turned back on themselves before resolving. No language Xeeona recognized, not the sharp consonants of the elf tongues, nor the fluid southern dialects, nor the old trade speech that still lingered in mountain villages. Something older, something that did not want to be understood so much as felt. Xeona's jaw tightened. He pressed himself to the wall beside the door frame, listening. The voice did not pause, did not vary in its rhythm. Whatever the woman was doing, she was deep in it, focused, absent from the world in the way only certain kinds of concentration allowed. He eased the door open with his hand. The hinges did not betray him. The room-like cavern beyond was small, perhaps 4 paces across, 6 deep, the ceiling low and dressed in hanging roots that had pushed through the stone from above. The floor had been cleared, swept bare, and across it, drawn in a substance too dark and too deliberate to be anything other than blood, a series of symbols spread outward from a central point, like the web of something that had been patient for a very long time. In the center of the web knelt the woman he saved the night before, the one who stole his belongings. She wore nothing of what she had worn before. The thin, helpless cloth was gone. In its place, dark layered garments, close-fitted and severe, etched in something that caught what little light existed and refused to give it back. Her dark hair was bound back now, and her hands, which had trembled so convincingly in the cold, were steady, moving in slow arcs as she murmured. On the floor around her 3 shapes lay still. A man, a goblin, a rat, all dead, but twitching like a curse, all arranged with a precision that left nothing to chance. Xeona's gaze moved to the far edge of the room. There, half swallowed by shadow, stood the scarred goblin. He had not fled. He stood with his arms loose at his sides, yellow eyes reflecting the faint ambient glow of the blood-drawn symbols, watching the woman with an expression that Xeeona could not quite name. Behind her, near the left wall, close but not crowding, stood 2 more goblins. Their posture was not aggressive. They were simply present, in the way that guards are present, or witnesses. Xeoona recognized them. The two that had crouched over the woman in the snow, the ones that had turned and run the moment he stepped into the scene. They had not been attacking her, they had been with her. The understanding settled into place with the cold, quiet finality of a blade finding its sheath. The clearing, the screaming, the thin cloth and the trembling hands and the helpless eyes that had lingered on him with something softer than fear. All of it was staged. A frame built to catch a specific animal, baited with the one thing he would not be able to walk past. He had walked directly into it. The woman's murmuring ceased, her head turned. The eyes that found his across the blood-drawn floor were not frightened. They were not grateful. They were sharp as winter light, and amused in a way that suggested she had been expecting him to take slightly longer. A slow smile crossed her lips. "Ah," she said, her voice settling into its natural register, lower than before and considerably more composed. "The heroic ranger decides to join us after all." She rose fluidly from her kneel, brushing nothing from her hands. "Had you accepted the gift I offered last night," she continued, tilting her head with the precision of someone who had rehearsed nothing and prepared everything, "you would have saved us both a considerable amount of trouble." Her gaze dropped briefly to the crude goblin blade in his fist, then returned to his face with an expression that was not quite mockery. A low, unhurried laugh escaped her mouth. "But no matter," she said, you are here now." The laughter of the witch faded at its own pace, unhurried like smoke dispersing in still air. Xeeona did not move from the doorway. He stood with the crude goblin blade in his grip, his eyes moving across the room in the methodical way of a ranger who had learned that the first thing seen in a dangerous place was rarely the most important. The blood-drawn symbols on the floor. The three bodies, man, goblin, rat, arranged with the kind of purpose that left no room for accident. The two goblins standing behind the woman, not threatening, simply there. The scarred goblin, half consumed by shadow at the room's far edge, and the witch herself, watching Xeeona with those sharp, composed eyes. "You built this place," Xeeona said. It was not a question. She tilted her head, clearly amused that he had arrived there quicker than possible. "I did." She gestured upward with one hand, a languid motion that took in the ceiling, the walls, the whole hidden weight of conjured stone above them. "Difficult work. I won't pretend otherwise. Anchoring a structure to a place that doesn't want it, making it breathe like something old rather than something created that requires a particular kind of patience. I have been told that I possess too much of it. And the traps," Xeeona said. "Standard precautions." She moved to the side of the room, stepping around the outermost ring of symbols without looking down, navigating them from memory. Steel mechanisms for the careless. Something more refined for anyone who managed to get past those. She paused. "I confess the magical ward made me thinking. A ranger of your kind, navigating a dangerous binding without a drop of counterspell. I have not quite worked out how you managed it." Xeeona kept his face still. She had not worked it out because she had not considered the surprising variable. She thought he had somehow disarmed her trap. She had not looked at the scarred goblin, had not thought to wonder why the creature had stood aside while his other companions charged and died. The scarred goblin standing in the dark at the edge of his vision had not lured him here. He had been helping him since the beginning. The distinction settled into Xeona's mind with the quiet weight of a stone dropping into deep water. The sword left outside the clearing, the crude map drawn by unsteady hands. The trap mechanisms disarmed cleanly in the dark, the ward's inscription gouged through by something that understood exactly where the binding held its shape because the goblin had watched that binding be made in the first place. Whatever the goblin wanted from him, it was not what the witch wanted. He cleared his mind and returned his attention to the immediate problem. The woman was still speaking, her voice carrying that particular cadence of someone accustomed to holding a room. He let her. He was measuring distance. The floor between them was covered in symbols. He could not cross it quickly before understanding if there was a hidden danger on the outer rings. The two goblins behind here were not armed with anything serious. She herself carried no visible weapon. A witch who summoned things rarely needed one. He made his decision. Fast. Clean. One strike to end the threat before she could speak a word of any spell. She was capable. The conjured structure above him was proof enough of that, but capability meant nothing if she never had the chance to use it. He moved, or he began to. Her lips already started moving. Not a full incantation, not the measured rhythmic murmuring of a spell. This was something compressed, syllables crushed together, stripped of ceremony, spoken with the speed of someone who had practiced the same phrase until the magic itself had perfected itself. The blood symbols on the floor ignited, not with flame at first, with light, a deep pulsing red and yellow mixture that rose from the lines as if something beneath the stone had heard its name called and pressed upward as an answer. The outer rings darkened, the center blazed. The heat that rolled outward was not natural fire. It carried weight, intention, the particular quality of warmth that came from somewhere that did not share the same Xeeona stopped. From the burning center a demon rose. It stood, roughly the height of a man, though the comparison felt generous in the wrong direction. Its form was assembled from suggestion and heat, limbs that moved correctly without quite looking as though they belonged together, a face that held expression without inviting recognition. The sword in its hand was burning to point, not flickering the way torchlight flickered, but burning with steady, relentless hunger. Not one of the great terrors of the deep hells, not the kind of thing that shook mountains or broke the minds of men simply by being perceived. A lesser servant. A sellsword kind called for a specific work, the kind of summoning a genuinely skilled practitioner could accomplish without losing herself in the process. The woman laughed, high and clear, and entirely delighted. The creature attacked Xeeona without a warning. Xeeona dashed left, the burning blade carving through the air where his shoulder had been. Heat rolled across his arm, not from contact, just from proximity, and he hissed through his teeth as the skin tightened. He parried the creature's swing with the goblin's sword, and the impact traveled up his arm like a hammer striking an anvil. The blade held, barely. He struck back, twice. Both blows landed on nothing that seemed to care. The creature was fast. Faster than Xeeona would have guessed. It pressed him backward to the wall, each swing forcing him to choose between ground and flesh. He gave up his ground. He had less of it than he would have liked. The flaming sword came low. He threw himself over it, rolling hard across the stone floor, and the heat washed across his back like an open furnace door. He came up on his knees, breathing sharp, and found himself looking directly at the scarred goblin. The creature had not moved from its position in the dark. Its yellow eyes were fixed on Xeeona with an expression that had nothing of the fight in it, only the focused, directed urgency of something trying to tell him something without speaking. Goblin's gaze moved, deliberate, unmistakable, to the left wall. Xeeona followed it. There, in the fold of darkness between a jutting shelf of stone and the wall itself, sat a small chest. He had not seen it when he entered. It was the size of a traveling satchel, bound in dark iron, its lid plain and unadorned. It sat where someone had placed it carefully, not discarded, stored. The creature's blade came down. Xeeona rolled again, moving not away from the flaming sword, but through it, rolling diagonally toward the wall, using the demon's own momentum as cover. He drove one shoulder into the stone shelf, caught the chest's handle and pulled. The woman's voice cracked across the room like a whip. "No!" The chest opened. There were two objects inside, a dagger, its blade the color of winter moonlight, its grip wrapped in leather dyed a deep and deliberate red, and beside it, small enough to sit in the palm, a topaz stone, smooth, uncut, the color of old honey, humming with a resonance that made his back teeth ache. Xeeona looked at the dagger. The weapon's blade spoke to him in a language he understood immediately. This was not goblin iron. This was not caravan guard steel. This had been made with intention, shaped for something specific. A name given to a blade before it was ever forged. He looked at the stone. From across the room, past the burning chaos of the fight, the scarred goblin raised one hand. Its fingers moved. A sharp, small gesture, nothing elaborate. "Break it." The woman was shouting something. The fiend was turning towards Xeeona, the burning sword rising, the heat preceding it like a warning. Xeeona threw the topaz onto the stone floor and cracked it open. The crack was small, anticlimactic, the kind of sound a river stone made when another stone struck it. What followed was not. The stone did not shatter cleanly, it exhaled. A column of dark smoke erupted from the break, rising fast, billowing outward, filling the air with the scent of pine resin and old paper, and something else entirely. The smell of a room that had been sealed for a very long time and had made its own climate in the dark. The woman's curse was not in any language Xeeona recognized, but her sentiment was unmistakable. The smoke thinned. A figure stood in it, short, broad through the shoulders in the compact way of someone who had been built for endurance rather than reach. A wide-brimmed hat sat tilted on his head, a feather jutting from the band at an angle that could only have been intentional. Brown leather covered him from collar to boot, worn, practical, the gear of a man who had used it and not just worn it. A short crossbow sat in his hands as naturally as a pipe in another man's mouth. He had a wide beard, trimmed close, and a face that had evidently decided some time ago to stay cheerful about the whole business of existing. He looked around the room, he looked at Xeeona, he looked at the fiend with the burning sword, he looked at the woman and her two goblins, he looked back at Xeeona. "Oh, wonderful," he said, with the bright, unhurried tone of a man who had just sat down to a meal he had been looking forward to. "People." He adjusted the crossbow in his grip and started running around. The last place had no people at all, just darkness and that dreadful humming. You have no idea." He paused to fire a bolt at the fiend, which struck the creature in what passed for its shoulder and made it stagger. How tedious the humming becomes after the first 3 months. Xeeona stared at him. "I don't know how long I was in there exactly." The gnome continued, pivoting smoothly. "Time moves strangely in a topaz I found, but I suspect it was a while because I am enormously pleased to be out." He glanced over his shoulder with an expression of genuine warmth. "I'm Gawain, by the way, Gawain Wildbatch. Tremendous to meet you." Xeeona looked at the red-gripped dagger in his hand. He looked at the fiend, recovering from Gawain's bolt, its burning sword turning back toward them both. He looked at the witch, whose composure had finally cracked into something that was not amusement. "Kill them!" she shouted. The fiend moved. Gawain raised his crossbow with an expression of mild professional interest. Xeeona settled into his stance, the dagger forward, the goblin blade in his offhand, the old familiar weight of a fight narrowing the world to what was immediately in front of him. At least he was not alone in it. That, he supposed, was something. The demon did not wait for them to find their footing. It came forward with the patience of something that had never learned to hurry, because it had never needed to. The burning sword traced a slow arc through the air, and the heat that preceded it pushed against Xeona's face like an open hand. He stepped left, let it pass, felt his skin tighten from proximity alone. In his right hand, the red-gripped dagger pulsed, not warmth, not vibration exactly. Something more deliberate, a bright light, faint but unmistakable, that intensified as the demon drew closer, as though the blade had been waiting in that chest for this conversation and was pleased, in whatever way enchanted things were capable of pleasure, to finally be having it. The crude sword was still in his other hand. He looked at it once. Then he threw it aside. It clattered against the stone wall, and he did not even watch it go. It had served its purpose. What came next required something the crude blade could not offer. Beside him, Gawain Wildbatch had already reloaded his crossbow. The gnome moved with a kind of cheerful economy that Xeeona found difficult to categorize. He did not charge. He did not plant himself and make a target of his position. He circled, wide, always moving, putting irregular stone and broken angles between himself and the enemies. And he talked us the entire time, with the bright, untroubled tone of a man narrating a walk through a pleasant market. "Magnificent creature, really," Gawain said, loosing a bolt into the fiend's shoulder. The impact made the thing stagger half a step. "Terrible manners, obviously, but the workmanship—" "Silence," the woman witch snapped. But Gawain kept talking. "The workmanship is really something. Summoning a demonic servant at this time of the year requires a specific kind of—" She raised her hand. Lightning cracked through the chamber. Not metaphorically. The bolt tore from her palm and punched into the wall 3 feet from Gawain's head, and the stone it struck did not crack so much as simply cease to be solid, fragments spraying outward in a sharp, smoking cloud. The gnome had already moved, had tilted at a slightly different angle than before, expression unchanged. And of course, he kept talking. "A specific kind of focus," he continued, "which you appear to be having some difficulty maintaining. No criticism intended." The woman's jaw tightened. Another bolt. This one went wide of Xeeona by less than he would have preferred, carved a furrow across the ceiling, and brought a section of stone down between him and the fiend in a grinding collapse of rubble and dust. The fiend stumbled backwards, its burning sword catching a falling slab and sending it spinning. The chamber had begun to feel considerably smaller than it had a moment ago. Xeeona did not wait for the dust to settle. He moved through it. The fiend was still recovering its balance when he reached it, and he drove the red dagger into its side with both hands behind the thrust. The blade went in cleanly, and the creature screamed, not the formless sound of something in pain, but something with shape to it, something that understood what was happening to it, and objected on a fundamental level. Xeeona twisted the grip and pulled the dagger free. The fiend spun on him, burning sword raised, and he dropped beneath the arc and struck again, lower this time into the joint where the creature's leg met its torso. Another scream, another stagger. Around him the chamber continued to come apart. The woman was not aiming anymore. She was reacting. Her composure finally cracked through into something raw underneath, and what came out was not precision but force. Bolt after bolt torn from her hands with the desperate, scattering energy of someone who had lost the thread of their plan and was pulling hard on whatever remained. Stone split. The floor buckled in one corner. A support pillar across the room simply dissolved. The two goblins that had flanked her throughout never had the chance to flee. One moment they were there, solid and present at her sides. The next, the ceiling above them had made a decision. Xeeona did not see them fall. He was already inside the fiend's guard again. The red dagger rising and falling in short, efficient arcs, each strike drawing another sound from the creature that had no equivalent in the world above ground. He was bleeding from somewhere. His shoulder, he thought, where a chip of stone had found him, and his ribs ached from the heat damage accumulated across a dozen near misses. He did not slow. The fiend raised its sword for what it clearly intended as a finishing blow, and Xeeona stepped into it, rather than away, putting himself inside the arc, where the blade could not reach him, and drove the dagger upward beneath the creature's arm with every pound of weight and intention he could put behind it. The scream this time was different. Shorter. Sharper. The sound of something being unmade rather than merely hurt. The burning sword gutted. The heat collapsed inward. The fiend's form, which had never been entirely committed to being one thing, came apart slowly like smoke when the source of it was extinguished. It did not die. Things like this did not die. It simply stopped being present, recalled to whatever unnamed place such creatures called home when the work was finished or the summoner's hold was broken. The room fell quiet. Xeeona straightened slowly. The woman stood across the rubble-filled floor, breathing hard, staring at the space where her servant had been. Then she looked at her sides, at the stone and silence where her goblins had stood. Something moved across her face. He did not know her well enough to name it. She looked at him. Then she raised her hand. "I would think carefully about that," Garwin said pleasantly from somewhere to Xeona's left. He had reloaded again. The crossbow was pointed at the ceiling, not threatening exactly, but present. "Whatever you have left in reserve, I promise you he has more patience than you do. And patience, in my experience, is the part that kills you." She did not lower her hand. "He is a ranger," she said. "He is," Gawain agreed. A particular kind, though. The sort that doesn't back up. The gnome tilted his head, feather bobbing. I've known a few. You can generally tell by the way they look at you just before the argument ends. Xeeona said nothing. He stood where he was. The red dagger hung loose at his side, dark with whatever passed for blood in a creature like the one he had just unmade. He did not shift his weight, did not raise the blade, did not take a single step forward or back. He simply looked at her. The woman's hand trembled. She began to form something, a word, the architecture of a final spell, and then she stopped. Not because of Xeeona, not because of Gawain. She stopped because something struck her from behind, small and precise and placed with the knowledge of someone who had spent a great deal of time watching where a person was most unguarded. She looked down, confused, her expression moving through surprise and then anger, and then something quieter than either. She fell. The scarred goblin stood behind her. He held a short blade, his own, not one he had borrowed, and his yellow eyes were steady. He watched her fall without expression. Then he looked at Xeeona. Xeeona crossed the room and crouched beside the woman. She was still breathing, barely. "The gnome," he said quietly. "He told you." Her eyes found his. The sharpness in them had not entirely left, but it no longer had anywhere useful to go. "He told you," Xeeona said again. "You should have listened." Her lips moved. Whatever she meant to say did not arrive. Then she was still. The scarred goblin regarded the body for a moment, then he looked at Xeeona, and for the first time since the clearing in the snow, since the crude sword left beside a sleeping man's hand, since the map drawn by unsteady fingers, since the ward's inscription gouged through in the dark, he opened his mouth. The words that came out were broken, worn down by a tongue built for a different shape of language, assembled from fragments of the common tongue in the same way the goblin's map had been assembled from fragments of memory and intention. "Thank," the goblin said. Then, after a pause, "You help, without knowing." Xeeona looked at him. "Why?" he asked. The goblin's yellow eyes moved briefly to the woman, then back. "She take us. Take the stone ones, take everything." He touched the scar on his face, not self-consciously but deliberately, the way a person references evidence. "We have no choice until you come." Xeeona said nothing. He did not fully trust the creature, he was not certain he ever would. But he understood what it was to be used by something more powerful than yourself, to survive in the margins of someone else's design until an unexpected variable appeared. The goblin straightened. "Hope not to meet again, Ranger," he said. Then, with a formality that sat strangely on his scarred face but sat there nonetheless, "Good hunting." He turned and walked toward the staircase. Above them, the walls had begun to breathe differently. "We should go," Gawain said, appearing at Xeona's shoulder with a crossbow on his back and his hat at a slightly new angle. He looked up at the ceiling with the expression of a man assessing how long he had before a social occasion became inconvenient. Conjured architecture tends to have opinions when its architect stops having them. Xeeona rose. He looked at the red dagger in his hand for a moment, then slid it through his belt. He would think about what it was and where it had come from later in a place with fewer falling stones. Now would be appropriate, Gawain added. They went up the stairs quickly through the narrow tunnel with its dismantled traps and its scored wards, through the chamber where 5 goblins lay cooling, and up through the stone hatch into the grey light of a northern afternoon that had never been more welcome. Behind them, beneath the hill, the structure settled, not dramatically, not with noise or fury, simply the way conjured things dissolved when the intention behind them was gone. The hill exhaled, and the ruin was not there anymore, and the forest closed over the absence as if it had been waiting for the opportunity. They stood in the cold a moment, breathing. Then Gawain brushed stone dust from his hat with the practiced motion of a man who had been extracting himself from enclosed spaces his entire life, and looked at Xeeona with an expression of genuine warmth. "You saved my life," the gnome said. "Technically, you saved it by breaking a rock, which is a method I had not previously considered. But the sentiment stands." "You saved mine too," Xeeona replied. Several times, Gawain waved a hand. "Details." They walked together for a while through the thinning trees, the snow softening underfoot, where the afternoon light reached the ground. The forest had found its breath again, a crow called somewhere distant, and the wind moved through the pines with the ordinary patience of wind that had no agenda. At a fork in the old game trail, Gawain stopped. "West," he said, looking at the path that descended toward the distant suggestion of lower land. "There are people I should find, debts I should pay. A few of them may even be glad to see me." He paused, considering. "Most of them." He extended a hand. Xeeona took it. "If your road brings you to the western coast," Gawain said, "ask for me at any port town between the river mouth and the Black Cliffs. Someone will know where I am." He grinned, bright and unhurried, the same expression he had worn stepping out of a column of smoke into a room full of enemies. "It has been a very long time since I had a capable partner." "I travel alone," Xeeona said. "Of course you do," the gnome agreed, entirely unbothered. He adjusted his hat, turned west, and walked. Xeeona watched him go. The feather in the band of the hat bobbed once around a bend in the trail, and then the forest had him, and the sound of his footsteps faded into the ordinary silence of the northern woods. Xeeona found a sheltered hollow not far from the fork, a natural depression between 2 old pines where the wind broke and the snow was thin. He gathered what wood was dry enough to catch, built a small fire, and sat beside it as the light began its long northern withdrawal. From his pack, he produced a strip of dried fish. He ate without ceremony, his back against a pine root, the red dagger resting across his knee, where the fire caught its blade and made it shine. Around him the forest breathed, slow, even, the particular breath of a wilderness that had returned to being only itself. Somewhere above, between the pines, the first stars appeared. Xeeona finished his meal, checked the dagger's edge in the firelight, and slid it back through his belt. Then he leaned his head back, closed his eyes, and let the north have its silence. He had earned a night of it.